everybody. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. My name is Jade. I'm our program coordinator with Focus. And today it is an honor to introduce you to Katie. Katie, take it away.
Fantastic. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. So if you are here for the workshop on talking about sexuality with our neurodiverse loved ones, you're in the right place. Great news. Pop it up. And y'all can see this? Oh, everyone's on mute.
Yes,
that's good, Jade. Okay, just quadruple checking. So before we start, I'll tell you a little bit about me. So I am actually a speech pathologist, speech language pathologist, and sexuality educator. I live in kind of North Atlanta, South Sandy Springs. I have my ASHA-C's Certificate of Clinical Competence. That's our national board. I have my Georgia license to practice, and then also a member of the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. I provide speech therapy in public schools, and actually my experience there inspired me to go ahead and get this specialty in sexuality for persons with disabilities. I was just telling Jade a few minutes ago, the reason largely is because I work in high schools and we automatically send a kind of panicked message, right? As soon as a student would, ask an inappropriate question or kind of explore their bodies in a school, we're just like, oh my goodness, please don't do that. This is terrifying. Don't touch that. Don't say this. And I was like, wow, these folks really are not getting any education right now on their sexuality. And yeah, that's how I had the idea. I graduated from FSU, Florida State, both undergrad and graduate degrees. A little bit more about me. I have 2 small dogs who I treat like human children. I'm a vegetarian and I coach boxing. So a little trivia. Okay, the mission of this workshop, right? We want to provide ideas and instill confidence for families and caregivers to talk about sexuality with loved ones with disabilities. Pretty straightforward. Why is it important? A lot of our loved ones are receiving no sexuality education in schools. Now that can be based on, your district's rules, your state's rules, but most of our students in the general ed population are at least getting a health class where they learn some very basic stuff. However, students, at least in my experience in those self-contained classes, if they do have an intellectual disability or sometimes if they have autism, they're probably not getting any education. They don't usually leave the classroom and go to health classes. We want to combat unhealthy messages from our culture. We want to normalize the topic. We want to show we're open and that our kids and neurodiverse loved ones can trust us, right? If you're in here, major props, because this is a very awkward and difficult topic. We want the opportunity to express our values, and we want to increase our family members' sexual health and reduce their risk of sexual abuse. That's probably one of the things I get the most questions about and the most concerns about is abuse and being taken advantage of. Self-advocates say they need these conversations, one, so they can learn to have healthy relationships, right? I had another say, so we aren't lonely, right? Sexuality can just mean friendship and important relationships. So they're able to make informed choices, right? Deserving access to information just like everybody else. And so they can pick the right person, right? And I believe this person was talking about like a life partner. And what does sexual health for neurodiverse people look like? Well, it looks just like anybody else's. Feeling good about their bodies, feeling good about who they are and having high self-esteem, feeling good about their gender identity and sexual orientation, having relationships that are positive and pleasurable, not exploitive, having information to make healthy decisions, and avoiding STIs, unintended pregnancies, and other challenges, right? So just like any person, a neurotypical person, this is what sexual health looks like, among other things. Okay, before we get started, I always set my group rules. Respect our differences of opinion. We will talk about opinions and values. Confidentiality, right? I know some of you probably know each other, but we're going to not turn around and share what somebody said unless they express that they want everyone to know. There's absolutely no such thing as a stupid question because this is a very difficult topic. And please have fun. Okay, so here's our first activity coming up. I'm going to read different situations out loud. Your job is to reflect on your gut thoughts and feelings, not what you think you should feel. Okay, this is your attitudes and your values. Afterwards, we'll discuss. You'll only be asked to share what you feel comfortable sharing. So I'm not going to call on anybody. I'm just going to put it out there to the group. Did anything surprise you? You know, what are some of the attitudes and values that you had during the activity? All right. So the next slide is going to show what I'm reading. I will read them out loud. I'm going to take a break between each one, and y'all think about if you agree or disagree, why you have that feeling. It is okay for a 16-year-old to have sexual intercourse. It is okay for a person with a vulva to have many partners. It is okay for a person to masturbate. It is okay for a person with the penis to refuse to wear a condom. It is okay for a person with the uterus to have 3 abortions. Think about your values and your opinions on that. It is okay for an 18-year-old person to watch pornography. It is okay for someone to identify as non-binary and be referred to as they instead of he, she. It is okay for a person with a penis to wear women's clothes. It is okay for a person to have sex when they're not in love. It is okay for 2 people with disabilities to have a child. So I love this list. I love reflecting on these because when I first did this activity, I was actually quite surprised by some of my gut reactions. Does anybody have anything that they would like to share? Not required at all. I'll give us a minute, but anything that surprised you, anything that took a second to decide how you feel about it, anything that you say yes, but, or no, but.
I'll share. This is Elisa Armstrong Gibbs.
Hi, Elisa.
Hi. I had a couple of yes buts and no buts.
Oh yeah, what were they?
I had some that I also used to think was okay when I was younger, but as I've gotten older and have children and grandchildren, I'm like, no, I'm not okay with it. Like the first one, I'm not okay with 16-year-olds having sexual intercourse.
That's very interesting. That's a really good example. Would you say when you were 16, you probably felt different or hard to say?
I think if my memory does not serve me very well given my age, but I was probably around 16, 17 when I lost my virginity. And by the time I was mid-20s or so, I wasn't okay with that. So I have not been okay with that for a long time.
Yeah, and that's coming from your experience.
Right. And my son is 17 and my oldest is 30. I have no idea when he lost his virginity, but my 17-year-old has not, but I can't imagine him, and he's the one with the disability. I can't imagine him doing that.
Yeah, yes. Thank you so much. Very well said. I was surprised. The one that surprised me the most, was for me was the final one. 2 people with disabilities having a child. And my justification was, how do we know for sure, depending on the severity and how much it impacts their communication or how much it impacts, right, their experiences with children? If you ask someone who knows that they love dolls, would you like to have your own real life baby? They probably would say yes. And that's important. But it's also really, really interesting to think, does that mean that they will be not suitable parents, but they'll be safe to be parents, right? That they could, like, how can you confirm that they understand what goes into that or what it would mean? But
Right.
I got some pushback, and it was a really, really good conversation because there is a dignity of risk, which we talk about a little bit later.
Yeah.
Anybody have any others? Yeah, go ahead, Elisa.
Oh, sorry, Kate, this is Kim Martin.
Hi.
Elisa, are you done?
Yes, I'm finished.
So I just wanted to just jump on what you said about that very last one. That's the one that really just had me like going, because I'm the mom of a 16-year-old who has autism, and I'm a special needs lawyer. So I talk to people about this all the time.
Yeah.
And my overwhelming position always, no matter what I'm doing, is from the point of view of a mom. And I so don't want to stifle my son in any way, but I also so don't want to raise any more babies.
Right.
And I do feel like if you're the parent who's the caregiver, you should get at least some sort of a voice. And I also worry very much about how often this is voluntary and how often it's just sort of a thing that happens because nobody's paying attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very well said. And that's a really good point, right? If the person with a disability is not totally independent, well, that'll mean that their caregiver or quasi-caregiver at that point is probably going to be helping raise that child. So then is it a group decision? Ooh, that's a really good point. Any other thoughts before we move on? Wonderful. Thank you guys so much. So none of our attitudes, opinions, or values can be wrong, right? People get mixed up these days thinking an opinion can be wrong. It really can't. Okay, so it's okay to pass along our values to our children and to our family members, but it's a huge responsibility on us, right? We need to be thoughtful and responsible with the information that we share. It is irresponsible and unfair to provide incorrect information to our loved ones with disabilities. It is damaging to self-esteem and dangerous. All right, so this includes scare tactics, which honestly, I think a lot of us probably grew up with ourselves. Which brings me to our next discussion point. If you're comfortable sharing, what was the primary message that you received about sexuality growing up?
That it was something not to be talked about with your parents.
Yep. That don't ask, don't tell, right? Yeah. Did anybody else have the don't ask, don't tell? You can raise your hand or
just not to do it.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. Wow, that's the consensus, huh? Yeah, I find that when I do these workshops, that's instantly and almost across the board the answer. Don't ask, don't tell, but don't do it. And don't make any mistakes. What are the reasons it can be difficult to talk about sexuality now with our kids or our loved ones? Why is it hard?
It's uncomfortable.
Yes, 100%. Yes, it is. Very good.
Don't necessarily know when too much, when you're it can't even get it out, right? Like, what is the balance of what's age appropriate, what you should know for the real world, good touch, bad touch, who should be providing? I mean, it's just, endless, honestly.
Yep. Yeah, Elisa, did you have something similar?
Yeah, I think in my situation with my older son, I think it was the fact that there would be follow-up questions, and how comfortable would I feel answering his questions, because he was very specific. He wanted to know details of things.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, that is intimidating.
Yeah, and how much do you disclose about yourself, versus just keeping it very generic and on the child.
Did he ask you specifics about yourself or?
Yeah, he did.
Oh, wow. He's brave.
He did.
He's very curious.
So my son is I guess my barrier would be he's nonverbal, but he's also figuring out that he has body parts and they do things, but I don't know how to explain it to him. What do we show him? Like, I just don't even know how much of it he understands or how to do any of that.
Yep. How old is he?
He's 11 now.
Ah, such a good age.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm in that same boat. I have a 16-year-old who, of course, is in that beyond the age range where he's old enough to know about everything, but developmentally, he's almost more at the level of maybe a 7-year-old or 8-year-old. He's into Thomas the Train, and he's very innocent, but of course, he's got a teenage body, and he's nonverbal, and he's deaf. So I have no idea, like, what to say, or am I going to overexpose him, or how do I answer questions, and who's supposed to discuss this? And he's a son, and I'm a mom, and it's just, I don't know what to tell him from a woman's perspective, so it's very confusing.
Yeah, the rule of thumb right now, which this is a relatively new field, but the rule of thumb is make it age appropriate and adapt the level of complexity as much as you need to. So, like, if you do require more visuals and fewer verbal explanations, do something like that, right? Or if you need to teach it very slowly and wait for confirmation that they understood, you do something like that, whether it be yes or no questions or repeating or things like that. But that's a very good point. I think there also is, someone might have touched on it, but a fear that teaching equals action. So maybe, and we do this with neurotypical kids too. We think that if we teach them safe sex, then they're going to have more sex. Although research has kind of proven at this point that that's not really the case, but it's still, I mean, it seems like it would make sense, and it is a rational worry. All right, so what's our role? Provide information, of course. Listen, of course. Model, not showing them, parts of your body, but model as in model the behavior that you're teaching them, right? If they ask about boyfriends and girlfriends and you want to teach them self-esteem, well, we want to do our best to be a model of healthy self-esteem in our relationships as much as we can. We're not perfect. Supporting them, answering questions honestly, and as much as we can in a positive way about sexuality. And that doesn't mean altering our values, but it does mean things like thanking them for asking the question, right? Showing that you're proud of them for asking these questions. All right, so in early childhood, it's common and appropriate for young children to begin understanding sexuality in some of these ways. Understanding body parts and functions. Genital touching is extremely common, although it gets confusing for parents, wondering if it's sexual or just curiosity. Could be either. Their need for privacy already starts to increase. They question reproduction, right? I feel like you all who have children at least one child asks, where did I come from? Or where do babies come from? We do know that even at early ages, they understand their gender roles as male and female, or their assigned sex at birth. And also that at that early age, they already have an idea of the concept of body image. So what they should look like when they grow up, and already aspiring to having the bodies that they're taught they're supposed to have. For adolescents, we've got the physical changes of puberty and hygiene, of course, pimples, body odor, all that fun stuff, hair. Breaking up, friendships, the concepts of reproduction, pregnancy, birth, pregnancy options, or contraceptive options, expressions of sexuality, up, sexual feelings, of course, masturbation, expression of sexual orientation and gender identity, and even heightened awareness of body image and what they're told they should look like. And then establishing and maintaining intimate relationships. That becomes extremely important and a big part of sexuality, of course. And then as adults, we continue to establish and maintain our intimate relationships. We have to think about sometimes separation or divorce. Menopause. Menopause can be very confusing for an adult with a disability who has not been taught about it, as you can imagine. Changes in sexual functioning, pregnancy and birth, parenting, contraception and STIs, masturbation, and continued expression and discovery of sexual orientation and gender identity. I think for younger generations, they're exposed to it at an earlier age, right? It's becoming more typical to meet for our kids in elementary school to have friends who go by they, them pronouns. But even when I was in elementary school, I didn't know anybody who was non-binary. Does anybody have a child who knows somebody who's non-binary? I work at a high school and I have a lot, quite a few. I mean, it's a big high school, but not necessarily. Okay, I was just curious. Okay, so the next question is, how is a person with a developmental disabilities experience the same as somebody without a disability, right? Keeping in mind the things that we just reviewed, the different kind of stepping stones that a lot of people follow into understanding their sexuality. How are they the same for a person with a disability? And it is discussed on the next slide, so I'll just go a few seconds if anybody wants to discuss first. We can also answer, how is it different? A lot of things are the same, right? Everyone's assigned to, well, most folks are assigned a gender at birth. The gender roles are reinforced. The biological changes are often the same, unless there is a physiological component or, medication or something like that. Like I said earlier, the rule of thumb right now, and I don't see it changing, is they need the same information based on their biological age. Someone gave an amazing example of, I think, a 16-year-old or a teenager who maybe intellectually or, communicatively is similar to a 7-year-old. That was a great example. But with this person, what we would want to do is give them 16-year-olds or, their biological age, that level of information. But if we do need to alter the information a little bit or the way it's presented, we do that for them, right? If it means, we don't have extremely complex sentence structure, or we chunk the information so that it is suitable for them. But we want them to know what a 16-year-old should know. What's the same? They still have sexual feelings and needs. And they have dreams just like anyone else might. Relationships, having babies, things like that. Okay, but we do know that it's extremely different. One, like we discussed a little bit earlier, they often lack of basic sexuality information and skills. One thing that I always can't get over is the way that our, especially teenagers, are both over-sexualized and under-sexualized at the same time somehow. So I know a young man who loves My Little Pony, and at the same time, it feels like half of the people, like half of the adults who know him think it's because he is so innocent, and he's 19 now, 18 or 19. Half the people who know him think it's because he's so innocent and there's not a sexual bone in his body and he's exactly the same as a 4-year-old. And the other half think that it's a fetish. And couldn't it be somewhere in the middle or neither? Right? So that's an example. And they all also are, like I mentioned, often separated from peers, especially in the educational setting where students in even those co-taught classes or those small group classes get a health class where they learn some essential information. Our students who are in those self-contained classes often don't have access to that. They're often considered children or treated like children, right? Behaviors are accepted or forgiven, and they're very, very protected. So an example I always think of is hugging, which is such a sweet thing and such a wonderful thing. But sometimes a stranger doesn't want to be hugged. And what we do is we sometimes excuse it. Sometimes a stranger definitely wants to be hugged and it has made their day. But if we had a neurotypical kid and they were 17 years old and hugging the clerk at the grocery store, we would be like, what are you doing? The nature of their disability, right? Maybe, I know several of you have mentioned that you have kids with autism. They might not pick up on social cues the same, or need additional topics, or have trouble identifying the emotions of others, which can be a huge barrier to intimate relationships. Doesn't make them impossible, but it means needing to have a lot of strategies and being self-aware. Might lack friendships, social opportunities, missing informal learning opportunities, or even, just generally feel lonely. This is a big one, often lacking privacy to explore their sexuality, right? If we're worried that our loved one is going to put themselves in a dangerous situation if they're alone in their room, that's important. But gosh, wouldn't it be tough to be told you're never allowed to touch your genitals, but then you never have the opportunity to do it in private? Many parents let go of dreams for their child related to sexuality or think of them as not being sexual. And like I mentioned earlier, we worry a lot about the rate of abuse, which is way higher for people with disabilities. That is true. How we teach the topics is different, both for better and for worse sometimes. And the person may have a wide range of abilities and limitations, kind of tied into the nature of their disability, right? I mean, it's wild that our students or our loved ones, our kids who maybe are neurotypical are able to Google, how to get access to condoms or how to break up with somebody or tips for flirting. But then maybe our students who don't have Google literacy, don't have computer literacy, don't have the physical ability to look something up like that, or don't have the language to type something into that Google bar, are the ones who are not being taught. Okay, so when we're talking to our loved ones who are neurodiverse about sexuality, important tips. And this is tough. First of all, you may need to initiate, right? You know that something is going on under the table, or you know that something is going on at school. They might be embarrassed. They might not bring it up. Using inclusive language is always important, right? I always use the example of course, there's person first language, but we also want to consider, if you know for sure that your child identifies as the sex that they were given at birth, then you can just use female pronouns. But be considered, like be extra mindful of that, right? If they're expressing that they think they might be non-binary or they might be trans, it's a dangerous path because it could be against your values, but they might just shut you out immediately if you're not using that inclusive language. Second, it is okay to feel embarrassed. Shortly, we're going to do some activities together that are embarrassing. Okay, no one is required to participate. I can do it all by myself, but I will almost definitely blush because it's awkward and uncomfortable, right? Just like Jade said earlier, that's one of the biggest barriers to talking to our kids about sexuality, whether they're neurotypical or neurodiverse. It's embarrassing. It's okay not to know an answer. Coming back to the question later is always good. Using a private tone in a private place, right? Just because somebody, like if your kid is doing something in public, right? We still want to respect that they might be aware of what's going on. They still might be embarrassed, even though it's not easy for them to show it. Like I mentioned earlier, giving age-appropriate information. Probably the hardest one, trying not to react, right? Even if they do something shocking, even if they do something that you can't believe that they don't understand that it's not okay to do in public or to do at all, we want to do our best not to be reactive. Practice and try to give a consistent message. Okay. During those teachable moments, we want to reassure the person that it's good to ask questions, even if it's a scary question, right? Just like I think Elisa was saying, she has a kid who was really, really good about adding questions on during the discussion. And that is terrifying because it might start with something really simple and easy, like flirting. And before you know it, he's asking you about when you lost your virginity, right? We don't want to say, okay, no more. Like, these questions are not okay. But it is okay to say, I don't know if I'm comfortable sharing that yet. Let me really think about it. But we want them to feel like asking the questions is always a good thing. When the person has a disability, it's important, and luckily, I think everyone in here is a parent or a very close caregiver, but finding out what the person is thinking or is really asking, right? Because they might not quite have the language to ask a really complicated question or an embarrassing question. Deciding what messages you want to give, right? This goes with the previous slide of being consistent, but knowing ahead of time, okay, I'm going to assert my values on this, but I'm going to let her decide for herself on this. Answer the question simply using medical terminology. That's something I always recommend. I had a family who I worked with who they were teaching their daughter, who was a teenager, like she was older. They were teaching her to call pretty much all her genitals her purse, which is endearing, but very sadly, when someone was touching her without her consent and she told the teacher, he touched my purse, the teacher didn't know that that was something very serious that needed to be addressed. And it took longer than it should have just because she didn't know the medical terminology. And I don't say that to scare anybody, but rather, it's better to teach your kid or your loved one the term should they need to use it. I know that can be tricky, right? Because I always give the question whenever I describe this workshop, gosh, what if you have a sister with echolalia and you teach her the word penis? And then she runs around the grocery store yelling penis, penis, penis. That's extremely awkward. And it might make people think, what have you done to this woman? But it is, at least right now, I'd strongly recommend it. So that, like I said, they have the option to use that terminology if a situation does arise, or so that they can, they know that you're taking them seriously. Encouraging the person to give feedback or repeat information back to you, if possible. I know we do have some people who have kids who are nonverbal. If you have speech therapy, then you can always ask the speech therapist to help out with confirming, right, that they can demonstrate their knowledge to the best of their ability. Yes or no questions. Oh, did you understand when I told you about birth control? Yes. Okay, well, let me ask you a question just to make sure. Is birth control something that you take because it tastes good? That might be a really simplified example of a question, but get confirmation kind of where you can. And it's always good to get their feedback, because then you know that they're processing the information. And usually I find that especially teenagers respond, just say like, it's really cool that my mom is willing to talk about this, even though it's hard. So one method that I recommend a lot of the time, which we'll practice, and this is where it gets super fun, is the Scarborough method. This is something I recommend for parents who want to start talking to their kids or their loved ones about sexuality. Very straightforward. Someone asks you a question, what is blank? You give the physical components, what is it? The social components, how does it relate to privacy, responsibility, laws, and the emotional feelings that are connected to it. So for example, what's a condom? Right? Your kid comes up to you and says, oh, I heard somebody talking about a condom at school today. What's that? You can go physical. It's a rubber sock that covers a penis. Easy. They might say, a sock. You say, yeah, it looks like a sock, but it's made out of rubber. Social, using a condom is private. It protects you and your partner when you're enjoying sexual acts. And then emotional. Many people feel good when they use them because they're being responsible and protecting themselves and their partner. Right? There probably will be follow-up questions, but this gives a really nice way to start giving your answer, right? They've got the whole picture at this point. Okay. So I have some very brave participants. I'm going to ask for a volunteer to choose one of these and see if you can give an answer using the Scarborough method. So remember, that's the physical attributes of something, social, like how does it tie in with laws and expectations, and emotional. So our options are, what does having your period mean? What is flirting? What is a boner? Do I have any volunteers to pick one and give us an answer using the Scarborough method?
Well, I've actually had to have that last one with my son that has
Did he
Down
hear it
syndrome.
at school?
No, he's homeschooled.
Okay.
And he didn't ask in that, he didn't use that terminology, but I just noticed that he was having the erections start. And he didn't know.
Wonderful. Okay.
He didn't know how to handle it, and it happens in public. And I was talking to his father about it because I wanted his father to handle that conversation. I don't think he was all that comfortable having that conversation. We bought books and that type of thing. But I did finally have the conversation with him where I said, you know, I told him that it was called an erection. I gave him that terminology.
Great.
And that's the only terminology that I use with him for that. I asked questions about it. So I said, you know, is it uncomfortable? You know, it could, I'm trying to think of the last conversation we had because I just had to have another one. Because we were in the car and it was uncomfortable because he was wearing some jeans and he was fiddling with himself. So I had that, you know, I said, is it uncomfortable? I know your penis is getting hard right now. You're having an erection. But this is something that is private. When you're out in public, you don't want to show that off. You want to hide it as much as possible. You know, and if you're at home, you don't want to be sitting out in the living room, touching yourself during that time. That's what you do in your bedroom or in the bathroom when you're alone. And I don't know that I said anything about the emotional part of it. I'm trying to think, what could I have said? I'm not sure because I just focused on the you know, the physical and the social aspects of it.
That's fantastic. That sounds like the conversation hopefully went really well. It sounds like you covered it really, really well.
Yeah. And he giggled and,
Yep.
you know, and that was that.
Fantastic. And I like that. It sounds like, you know, you gave him the understanding that he deserved, right? that must be uncomfortable. Gosh, when it happens in the car in your jeans, that sounds awful. Right?
Mhm.
So that's fantastic. Yeah. I would say if I was to add anything emotional, right, we could talk about how it might feel good physically, and that might put somebody in a good mood. Or if you're wearing the wrong clothes or you can't touch yourself, it might be uncomfortable, put you in a bad mood. And you can talk about the emotions of others, right? Like you did a really good job saying, yeah, you want to do your best not to have an erection at the grocery store. And the reason is because it makes other people uncomfortable, because it is like such a private thing.
Right.
I love that. Anybody want to take on if someone asked, what does having your period mean?
I would say that was very helpful. Thank you for sharing that. Because I don't know what to say to my 11-year-old. I don't know. Like, I don't even know what to say now. So, I don't know what to say yet.
So if he asked you, is your name is pronounced Asada?
It's Asada.
Perfect. Thank you, Asada. So if he asked you, oh, I heard some girls in my class talking. Well, he's nonverbal. Is that correct?
He's not verbal, so he's 11, but he's more like 6, 7, loves Thomas as well.
Okay. Okay. So does he use a device or anything like
Yes,
that?
he has a device.
Okay. So if he was giving some indication, right, with the expressive communication that he does have, right, to kind of say period or say girl, period, and then you say, are you asking me about periods? And then, maybe kind of infer that maybe he overheard it in class or maybe he saw it in a video. What could you say are the physical components? How would you explain to him?
Oh boy.
And if you're like, yeah, I'm gonna tap out, just let me know and I'll take it over.
I would let him know that girls, I don't know, I would probably use the word bleed because he knows what blood is.
Great. Okay.
It's something that happens to girls. That's all I really know.
No, that's fantastic.
I'm so uncomfortable.
It is. It's totally uncomfortable.
And
It is
that's
always
why
going to
I'm
be
here.
uncomfortable.
That's
Yes.
why.
No, you're perfect. And you did such a good job keeping in mind that he understands what blood is. Right. So we could mention that. And at that age, if he doesn't have any friends who are non-binary or any friends who are trans, you could just say, girls, it's kind of up to you and up to, depending on where they're at in life. But yeah, girls, they bleed, right? If he doesn't have any idea like what a vagina is or what a uterus is, which he probably doesn't, you say they bleed, it comes out near where they pee. If you think that's what he could conceptualize, it goes into their underwear. What about the social?
The social part, maybe it's something like you said that's in their underwear and they take care of it in the bathroom.
Perfect. And then there's a big responsibility for girls, right? When they do get their periods. I mean, a lot of us, it looks like our moms or, women. So it's a huge responsibility, right? How would you explain the responsibility to him?
That part I don't know.
I would even say, you could say to him, well, nobody wants blood on their clothes.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Right? So then these girls have this responsibility that they have to put, you could show them a pad if you have it in your home, or just, basically like a big napkin into their underwear and make sure they don't stain their clothes.
Okay, yes.
And then the emotional is a whole nother component.
Oh, tell me about it.
Right? Because some girls feel excited and like they're becoming a woman, but it's really hard on their bodies.
Okay.
Right? And that could be something to explain to him early. Gosh, help him become an even more empathetic young man, teaching him, girls go through a lot when this happens, more than people born with penises probably could ever understand. And so teaching them, gosh, at an early age, that's something really, really hard for girls to go through. And it's hard on their bodies. It's uncomfortable. Their stomachs hurt. They can't help their mood, which For some people that's true, and for some it isn't, but I know it's tough on a lot of us. Perfect, Asada, very good. And our other example, what is flirting? That's a good one, right? For flirting, we might say physically, it could be standing close to somebody. It could mean you touch their arm a little bit more. Socially, people do it in public, right? It's safe. It's not necessarily a private thing. But you want to make sure, as far as responsibility, you want to make sure that you do it with people who seem interested and who do those things back to you, right? If you are really standing close to someone and touching their arm and rubbing their back and trying to flirt, and they're not doing it back to you, then you might really, really want to reflect on, is this person into me? And then emotional flirting is fun. It feels good. It might feel exciting. It might make your stomach feel a little bit like you have butterflies. It might make your body feel tingly, right? Because it's showing that you're interested in a person. Wonderful. So one more time, the Scarborough method, they ask about something, or you need to discuss something, just an easy go-to: physical, social, emotional. And then I'll probably lead to more really good questions. Okay, this is the last big chunk of this discussion, is responding to behaviors, which it sounds like you all are some incredible caregivers and parents who know your loved ones really, really well. But still, behaviors can be terrifying and they can be surprising, right? When we respond to behaviors, and by behaviors, I mean sexual behaviors, usually ones that are a little surprising or a little uncomfortable. We want to name the behavior and comment to the person as you see or hear it. If it's appropriate, you can praise them, right? But if it's public masturbation or public touching, be like, too much communication is almost enough, says the speech therapist. But saying, you know what, and there's using that private tone of voice, you know what, I noticed that you're touching below your waist, you're touching right around your vulva, you're touching your privates, or you're touching your genitals. You know what, we can talk about it a little bit more later, but right now I want you to try and stop that as best you can, okay? Because it's not really safe or okay to do it right now. Okay, so naming the behavior, observing it out loud, finding out the meaning or purpose of the behavior, and commenting to the person, which we'll talk about the meanings and purposes on the next one, probably the most important slide. Deciding what messages you want to give, right? Deciding ahead of time, right? So we don't panic. Give the message by responding simply, which we've discussed a little bit, right? Don't want to make it super confusing and give it 10 different nicknames and give mixed signals, and encouraging the person to give feedback or repeat information if possible, like we talked about earlier. So the purposes for behaviors, right? There are a lot. There's medical, right? Are they doing it because of a medical issue, right? Itching and scratching. It could just be a medical issue. Structural. Is it due to something structural, right? Testicles are smushed into someone's jeans and they move around. Modeling. Is the behavior being modeled by someone? Partner selection. Is the behavior because they have no options for partners? Inappropriate courtship, right? Is it because they've not been taught, oops, that's typo, taught how to court somebody, right? Proposing to someone they have a crush on in middle school, although probably a little bit adorable. That's not an appropriate courtship, right? Maybe they just don't understand that the steps that go first. Sexual knowledge. Do they simply lack education? Learning history. Is the behavior because of something they learned growing up? Perpetual arousal, right? Maybe they don't complete, they don't have an orgasm, and that can't really be helped. They're just still aroused. Medications, right? That can cause arousal, or that can cause lack of awareness. Is it because of a change in medication? Or just moral vacuum, right? No one's told them that that's not going to be okay, that that's not an okay thing to do. I worked with a young woman one time who was masturbating with pencils, which makes us all go, oh my gosh, right? Because that's not healthy for her body. There are little pieces that could come off like that all around, not good. but gosh, what were some of the purposes of her behavior, which we'll have other examples on the next slide. But for her, she lacked sexual knowledge, right? She didn't understand that there were other options, or no one had told her that she can't put pencils in her body. Partner selection, right? There are options besides another person, like masturbation, but masturbating with the pencil was not going to work. All right, so here's our next scenario, our first scenario. You're at McDonald's, you're having lunch with your son. When you return from the restroom, you find your son masturbating at the table. Right? This would be something pretty shocking. It would be understandable for a person to want to react or to be tempted to react. But what are some potential purposes for that behavior? And I'm going to go back a slide. And they could be on this slide, or it can be, something that you think, oh gosh, my son would do this because blank. Any thoughts?
Sexual knowledge.
Yes, I agree. Right, and sexual knowledge can mean public versus private, right? That's a huge one. Fantastic. How would you respond in that situation? Anybody have an idea?
I've actually had this situation, not with my child, but with a child that was under my care.
Mm.
And I just told him to, first of all, go and wash his hands and come, let's go wash your hands and come back to the table. Went, washed hands, got the food, packed it up, went back to the car and had the conversation in the car, not in the restaurant. And just told him that was private, that he should do that alone, where no one can see him, in his room, in his bathroom, and that I would have to have this discussion with his parents and let them know.
That's a good idea, because you want them to be prepared, or to have that conversation with him as well to kind of reinforce. So yeah, that's very important. All right, what about this one? This one's a little less shocking, but still a good question. And we can get multiple opinions on this too. While you're at the grocery store with your sister, and we're going to imagine that our sister is about the same age as us, so an adult. You see her give a big hug to the clerk who she's not met before today. What are some purposes for that behavior? I see a few. I would definitely think inappropriate courtship.
Maybe modeling as well.
Mm-hmm. Elisa, did you see another one?
Well, I saw several, just like everybody else. There's a few. Partner selection.
Fantastic.
Moral vacuum.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And this is one that people have different opinions on. Because I know that I can work with a person on socially appropriate hugging, and I can drill it into their minds when we're together, for that hour or two a week, as much as I want. But the moment they step out into the real world and somebody thinks that they're adorable, they're just going to potentially revert back, right? And that's their right. All those other people who think it's sweet and who want the hug, that's fine. But their opinion then might be different than mine, where I think you need to ask first, or you need to know someone a little bit better first. So the how would you respond? It just depends who you are and what your family is teaching. It also, I find, And this is an important one because, like I said, several of you all, it sounds like, have children who have autism, which may or may not mean that they have a visible disability. Because a person with Down syndrome is probably going to get away with hugging strangers more often than a person who has no visible disability. And the reason is because as people look at them, see that there's a disability present, and accept behaviors more readily. Doesn't mean it's right, but it's just socially true. So then the expectation can be different based on what they may or may not get away with. Okay, nearly done with slides, and we'll do a little bit of questions. Consent is probably the most complex area in sexuality education, especially, I mean, those of y'all who have nonverbal children, gosh, what does that look like, right? One's expressive communication can be significantly impacted by a disability, which we know. So consider a person who repeats words back to people when they don't understand a question, or who automatically answers yes when asked yes or no questions. So if she's asked, do you want to be my girlfriend? And she repeats girlfriend, or just says yes automatically, how do we determine that they're giving consent? The correct answer is sometimes we can't, right? You might need to reinforce and ask them to demonstrate understanding and demonstrate their response many times, right? Ask it 10 different ways. Ask it as a negative, ask it as a double negative. See if you can find a way to get some consistency if that expressive communication component is complicated. Can anybody think of any other areas or examples where consent can be difficult to determine? I have another one. While y'all think, if anybody is still thinking, I work with a young man who does, I mean, basically like a facilitated communication, which is controversial, and I am a speech therapist. But gosh, when they are communicating in a way that is so dependent on a facilitator, that can be a beautiful thing, but it also can be dangerous for me to definitely accept what they say as 100% their words. Gosh, especially in a really complex question. Like, do you want to have kids one day? Or like, do you want to have sex with your new boyfriend? That's really tricky. Anybody have any other examples? Consent is complicated. I mean, it's complicated with neurotypical people, but gosh, when we start getting into the territory of nonverbal or people with communication disorders, it's a very interesting topic. On the note of consent, so this is from one of my courses that I do, which is called Whole Person. This is the way I teach consent because I want everyone to kind of have an idea of how to teach it. So this is just copy pasted from my workbook, but all touch must be consensual. This means both people agree to be touched and that both people say yes. It doesn't have to be verbally for people who are nonverbal, but they demonstrate yes, that they want something. Touch must be freely chosen. There cannot be threats, pressure, lies, or other force. Dating someone or being in a consensual relationship with them is different than any other relationship. Some feelings that come with this kind of relationship might include love, trust, enjoy being with them, attraction, sexual desire, butterflies in your stomach, which you can explain if they're not familiar with that idiom, and more. And then examples of touch in these relationships might be sitting close, holding hands, kissing, hugging, sexual touch. Like I said, I always include that because consent is really complicated to teach. But if we're teaching someone self-esteem and autonomy, that they're the only one 100% responsible for what happens to their bodies, even though a lot of time we're legally responsible for them, but they're the ones who ultimately make those decisions, then we want to teach them consent and autonomy as best we can. All right, we talked about this briefly earlier, but dignity of risk, what is it? And this is tough for us. The dignity of risk is the right for an individual to take risks when participating in life experiences and understanding that they might not all be positive. can be a very difficult concept for caregivers and parents, because we don't want our loved ones to be heartbroken, to be taken advantage of, or to be hurt. It's often true even with neurotypical children, right? We don't want them to ask that girl out who might be out of their league, because they're going to be heartbroken and embarrassed, right? And sometimes we're more likely to advise against, or even not permit our kids with disabilities to take those risks, because we just want to protect them. And sometimes it is essential, right? If you know that they're at risk of being taken advantage of being raped, of having non-consensual sex or anything like that, then of course we want to be protective. But if they're just going to face plant and get rejected by somebody who they ask out on TikTok, sometimes that's part of being a teenager or part of being a young adult. Sometimes it means we can just hold them when they cry, just like a neurotypical child. Okay, last slide, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion at the end or take any questions. So the biggest takeaways I want everyone to remember: your family member is a full person with complex needs and desires the same as neurotypical people, right? From all ages, like we talked about, in the different stages of life, we're learning about our sexuality every day, even those little kids. Do your best not to be reactive. I promise, even if your loved one does something surprising, right, like masturbating in public or masturbating with something inappropriate or asking a surprising question, they're still the same person they were before the action. Behaviors have a purpose. Behaviors that are not socially appropriate or safe may require your honest and loving redirection or teaching. It's good to say, I don't know the answer to that. Let me try and find out, and we'll talk about it soon. I promise they probably won't forget. They will remind you every day that you promised you were going to find out more details about XYZ. And like we talked about toward the very beginning, values and facts are different. Teaching your values to your family members is a good thing. Teaching false facts can be a very dangerous thing. And, ironically, you might lie to them to avoid them being taken advantage of. But honestly, we're taking advantage if we're lying to them, right? Taking advantage of their disability and telling them false information, knowing that they might not be able to Google it and learn otherwise. So just be really, really considerate that we want to protect their dignity and be honest. All right. That is the end of our PowerPoint. I'm going to actually stop sharing, and then it's just about 7 o'clock, but I can hang out for a bit and ask questions. Let me go ahead and stop sharing.
Thank you, Kate. Can you share your contact and email address for anyone that is looking to contact you after this workshop?
Yes, of course. That is a very good idea. So I'll put it in the chat as well. But I have a website. I'm not sending it to only Jade. Oh, it lets me only send it to you, Jade. Will you just copy paste it for me? So it's sending to Jade only, but she'll send it to the whole group. So my email is pretty simple: northatlantaspeech@gmail.com. And the website is a tiny bit different because the domain was taken. But the website is just northatlspeech.com. Like I kind of touched on, I do classes, both one-on-one and group. They're called Whole Person and Whole Kid, which there's more details about them on the website. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, I also work in schools and do a bunch of other random stuff like coach boxing. And so if anyone is interested in getting started in this field, there's no such thing as competition. Like, the point of me doing this is to spread information and make the lives of people with disabilities better and easier. So the woman who I got started with, who's incredible and probably the leader in this field, her name's Catherine McLaughlin, and her company, which I'm going to send to Jade as well for her to copy paste, is called Elevatus, ELEVATUS. So she has tons of parent resources. She's one of the top researchers in this field. She has like a course on like introduction to becoming a sexuality educator, which is wonderful. Like I said, there's no such thing as competition. I would love if everybody in this decided, yes, I want to do this for a living, or I want to do this volunteer or as a side hustle, because the point is making lives better. So there's that. Okay, anything else, Jade, that I'm forgetting before we take possible questions?
No, okay, I think you covered it all. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, I can hang on for a little longer if anybody does want to ask any specific questions or tell like, oh, an interesting story, or it is up to you all. I know it's probably about supper time, but
I didn't necessarily have a specific question, but I was going to ask about like resources that you would maybe recommend. I've tried the library to find like books and things like that, but have not been successful on one, talking to my son at the level that he understands, and then two, just the material is not there.
yes, agreed. So you said your son has autism, is that correct?
Yes, I did not say, I'm sorry. He is on the autism spectrum, and
Okay.
just all the typical things. He stems, he's busy, he moves around, does vocalization, loud noises bother him, those kind of things.
Okay. There are a lot. I don't recommend a specific one, but there are several very good books for people with developmental disabilities and autism that involve a lot of social stories and a lot of pictures. Not to like plug a private company, but Amazon, if you search like disability, like, or talking to kids about sex or disability sex, they have some really, really good ones. And the nice thing about Amazon too is you can kind of get a peek into the book and see like, would my son understand this, or does he need something more visual, or does he need something with less complex language? And then Elevatus, I am 99% sure that you do not have to take any workshops to join their mailing list, and they have tons of free resources, which I always recommend to families as well.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Asada.
No, I was just saying thank you. I couldn't find the screen that we all were on to click back and say thank you. And that was Elevators. I see your website as well.
Yes. So it should have been sent by Jade. It's ELEVATUS. Mm-hmm. And then she knows everybody in the field. Catherine McLaughlin does. So on her website, she would be even way better at referring you to probably dozens and dozens of, organizations and books, and she's amazing. Anything else at all?
Okay, I don't know if anyone has any other questions, but they certainly have your email address if they do. Otherwise, we just appreciate you giving us the time and sharing your information and education with us.
Of course, my pleasure. I really loved it. And like I said, I do this because it's just something that I care about deeply and think, parents deserve the community, and parents deserve the access to information, and the kids and people with disabilities certainly deserve the access to information and the dignity that comes with it. So thank you all so much for logging in. You are already incredible parents for logging into this like very abstract and difficult and awkward workshop on this very difficult topic. So thank you all so much for just making the world a better place for your families and for the people in your lives.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And again, Kate, we are grateful for your time. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you all again very much. Hope everyone has a nice dinner, and email me if you have any other questions.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.